Ask, and it shall be given unto you. Seek, you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. Today's sermon deals with the question of questioning. And it must be admitted right out of the bag that it is not a question which is raised by most of our churches or by most of our religious traditions. Indeed, if there's one place in life other than politics where one is not supposed to ask questions, it's religion. This goes back a long time. The ancients would not permit questions to be asked because the knowledge was too mysterious, too powerful, too great. And so the average layperson in most of the religious traditions of the world is told what to do and how to do it, and if you don't understand, it's because you don't have the right experience, the right mysteries, and the right knowledge. On the annual New Year's enthronement festival, when Marduk was carried, the god of the Mesopotamians, down to the temple, the sole function of the religious community was to stand by the side, cheer when cheering was necessary, and bow down when bowing. That was their annual religious duty. That plus paying their taxes to the church. Indeed, even in the present world, if you talk to many people and try to open up dialogue with some of the other world's great religions, you run into a problem. The Muslim people are not equipped to talk about what their religion means. It's something that they try to live. So to discuss how you come to this particular theological point of view is far from them. For a number of years, we've tried to get Muslims and Buddhists and a number of other people to talk about the religious dimension in their life. And it's not something that they do easily. There are a few scholars, generally outside the faith, who are able to capsulize the experience. But to ask questions is difficult. What do? You will now go into many churches, and to ask questions is something unheard of. Over the past few weeks, as we've been doing the Bible study and working with the concepts of Jesus, one of our people kept saying, when I would say to her, how would they answer that in the church you were raised? They would never ask that kind of question. So it's rare to be able to stand and to say that the biblical tradition is one of asking. That those traditions which deny you the freedom to explore at the depth of your soul the understanding of life to be found in the biblical tradition are failing for a host of reasons which we shall attempt to explore this week and next. It started off very easily. Abraham raised all kinds of questions of God. He ultimately did what was required, but he didn't understand why. Moses was certainly not the kind of an individual who did God's will without question. He faced him face to face in a rare type of an experience and prodded and probed. Even the delightful story of Jonah is one of raising questions. Ultimately, God's will was done, but Jonah did everything in his power to avoid. Why should I go off and preach to those pagans? God, they're no good for anything anyhow. Help me to understand what this is all about. And the prophets right on down the line, Ezekiel and Amos and Isaiah, were all men of faith, but at the same time, questioners. And Jesus certainly went through a whole host of questions. He was not only prodded by the religious contemporaries who put a series of questions to him to see how he would answer, but at the same time, in the hour of his greatest agony, he could raise questions, ultimately giving up perhaps to faith, but wanting to know why and how and what. A few weeks ago, as we were studying the gospel traditions, I said that the questioning was not unique. It was a part of the Jewish experience, a part of the early Christian experience. The vast majority of Jewish materials from the time are debates on over how you make real in your life your understanding of life and God. I decided I would read just an interesting little thing to you from the Roman Plutarch. On the way in, I was reminded that this might apply to something that happened in Detroit. It was not chosen for that purpose. The statue, or the replica of the statue of Fatima arriving here, was not the background for the choice of this particular selection. Plutarch recounts the story of a statue of a goddess set at a temple. As the statue in honor of Roman women was set in place, it was related to have spoken. Plutarch is critical of the story. Quote, "They who tell the story say these words were spoken 2 times, wishing us to believe that what probably did not happen, happened, but it is difficult. For that statues have seemed to sweat and shed tears, and to release some drops which are like blood is not impossible. For wood and stone often gather a mold which produces a moisture, and they make many colors and receive coloring from the atmosphere. There's nothing to hinder thinking that the divine uses them as signs. It is possible that statues can emit a noise like a moan or a groan on account of a split or a division, which is more violent if it occurs deep in the interior. It is, however, completely impossible that articulate speech and language so clear and abundant and cultured could come from a lifeless thing. Since the human soul and even a God without a body put together and equipped with rational parts have never spoken and conversed, but where history compels us with many plausible witnesses, we would say an experience unlike that coming from the senses arises in the fantasizing portion of the soul and persuades the belief, such as in the dream, what we seem to hear, though do not hear, and see, though we do not see." Well, that's fascinating. He not only gives you an explanation on a rational ground long before the rationalistic school of philosophy, but he's so far into psychology that he understands dreams and the whole problems of dreams and fantasizing. And he raises legitimate questions from his point of view. What I'm trying to say is that ultimately in my own spiritual and mental and moral struggle, I have put every single item of my life on the questioning block. I come down with one conclusion, that there is nothing that ought not to be questioned, but that there are times when the question leads to a no answer. For example, can you intellectually prove God or not prove God? Played games with college students with years trying to intellectually understand God. God is not understandable totally in the terms of the intellect. There is no philosophical, there is no rational, there is no psychological, there is no proof of God. There's also no proof of no God. The question is one that can't be answered. Ultimately, I make one premise in all of my opening debate and discussion. A premise is necessary for any debate and discussion. The premise can be questioned like anything else, but you have to start somewhere, right? I can prove to you that in geometry, more than one line can be drawn perpendicular to a given line from an outside point, using the premises of geometry. Lobachevsky, the Russian mathematician, did it. Does that destroy the geometry? No, it just means that even the science of mathematics isn't as exact as we like to think. I start with the premise, God is. And because God is, we must. And then in my notes I put 3 dots. And from that point on, everything is open to question. Let's look at it. In the first place, we ought to recognize that a questioning of theology is not a questioning of faith. What is theology ultimately anyhow? I'm always somewhat amused and bemused by the literature that comes across my desk from numerous churches and religious groups and so on, talking about how their materials, for example, are doctrinally pure for the Sunday school. Well, isn't that interesting? Whose doctrine and whose purity? Ours is biblically based and not tainted by modernism, says one Sunday school material. biblically based when you can take nearly every single item in the material and put a red line through it? Paganism? No understanding of the Bible whatsoever? What gives them the right to be so proud? But if you question the concept of the Bible, you're questioning God. Nonsense. You're questioning the concepts of man explaining God. I was talking with Chris about this yesterday. She's downstairs taking care of some of the kids in the nursery. She said, isn't it amazing? A child can ask, what is God? Or who is God? And we smile at the sign of precociousness. We're happy about that. And we give an answer. But as soon as that child grows a little bit in terms of age and asks the same question, we say, that's not a question you should ask. We've given you the answer. Why is it that it's fine for a 3 or 4 or 5 or a 6-year-old to probe the concept of God, but that if I as an adult do it, I'm showing a lack of faith? As a matter of fact, it is not faith that I'm probing, because I've already started with God is, therefore I'm just questioning our concepts of God. How can I not question a concept of God that drove the Crusaders across Europe, raping, pillaging, killing, murdering, putting to death those that disagreed with them in any manner or form, all in the higher name of God? Can I accept that concept of God? How can I accept and not question a theological approach that is so narrow that there is one way, and a narrowly, carefully defined way that not only makes no sense according to the biblical record, but holds no truth in terms of human experience? To not question at that particular point seems to me to be the failure of our whole existence. When one questions theology, one is not questioning the existence of God, because we have accepted that. One is merely questioning our inadequate understanding of God. How is it that people who can talk about the inadequacy of the human being, the human spirit, the need for a godly transformation, can suddenly become so expert and infallible in terms of their definition of God? Isn't that an inner contradiction? Why is it that if I am so inadequate that I suddenly can be so perfect and defining? And so I would say the questioning is a questioning of our understanding, not of the fundamentals of God. It seems to me, in the second place, we ought to recognize that very often what is taken to be questioning is taken to be doubt or negative, and ought not to be. To question someone is to put them on the hot seat or on the griddle and to turn the screws on them. F. Lee Bailey did a beautiful job of questioning, but his whole purpose was not to get to the truth of something, but to destroy a witness. Now, I don't want to have doubt. Questioning, in the classic sense, is an attempt to find truth. It is not an attempt to destroy systems or individuals, but merely to ascertain that which is true. Does that make sense? What frustrates you about your kids coming home from college for the first time, or maybe the second or third time after they've really become a little bit acclimated to it, is that they suddenly have all kinds of questions that they know you can't answer, and they raise them not because they expect answers, but because they want to show you how little you know. It is a destructive approach to it. They have suddenly discovered that there are questions they never thought about, and they're so caught up with the idea of questioning, they don't know where to stop. A book has been published about Mr. Nixon, which is a brilliant example of that. These fellows started off asking some legitimate questions. It's now become a vendetta. They don't understand that they've lost the concept of seeking of truth and have tried to destroy, and by destroying, build their own self-image. It's a fruitless opportunity. One doesn't go anywhere with that. That's not the kind of questioning we're talking about. I can be very slashing, cutting. I can destroy as well as most anybody I know if I want to approach things that way. It has no effort to find truth. It's to cut you down to below me so I can sneer and say, see how petty and puny your ideas are. Ha, ha, ha. But the questioning which is legitimate in the religious tradition is not interested in cutting people down, but building up. It wants to get to the truth of a matter in such a way that we understand mutually. It means if there's a disagreement between us, we explore it with a willingness on my behalf to say, I may be wrong, help me to understand even better the call and the role of life. The reason is that the priests of the ancient church and in the ancient world didn't want that kind of questioning. It meant that they had to put themselves out and stand open to all comers and willingness to share. And that's a terrifying thing. Those of you who are teachers are always afraid of the unanswerable question until you get to the point where you're so comfortable with yourself that you can say, I don't know. And how many professionals like to admit in their field they don't know? How many ministers like to stand up and say, I have spent 30 years studying this and I still don't know? It's much easier to spout out a creed written by somebody else, memorized and unthought, than it is to really hammer out for yourself an understanding or an ability to say, it's a question I've dealt with and I cannot answer. Don't ask me, or ask me if you want, I'll tell you right now about the question of the resurrection. I do not know. It's a very strange event in history. There's no way that I can fully understand it. I work it and rework it and work it and rework it, and I just don't know. Do not know what to do with it. I stand unanswerable at that particular point. I have friends who will look at me and smile and say, you see, this is where the leap of faith comes in. Fine. Leap all you want and understand what you're doing, and I won't argue with you. But I still don't understand it, leaping or otherwise. So I think we have to recognize that when we raise questions, we're talking about man's concept of God, not God. I think when we raise questions, we're challenging the very heart of the religious message, not because we're afraid of what we're going to find, but because we recognize that ultimately we are searching for a truth and a full understanding. And what we run into is not fear from God about questioning, but fear from man about questioning. It's our inadequacies that we're afraid of, not God's, and therefore we make it a matter of mystery, so as to avoid having to find the answers. Karen, in her mini-sermon, meditation and prayer, don't be sorry about it, I learned a great deal, talked about the concept of learning. Now, isn't it fascinating? There isn't a single area in life where if you don't question, you're supposed to be growing, except religion. Isn't that interesting? In school, you're supposed to ask questions so that you grow in greater understanding. If you're learning another language, you ask questions so that you understand the language better. In nearly every area of life, the sign of a creative mind and a growing individual is his ability to ask questions, except in the area of religion, where suddenly you are told, if you ask questions, that's anathema, and somehow or another, a spirituality, a blind belief is supposed to be the answer. As I was working on this and reading on it, I came across a very interesting little Hebrew proverb. Mi she'eno sho'el, he who asks nothing, eno lomed, learns nothing. Now, we've been talking about growth and development and change, and the recognition that as you grow and change, that's a sign, and that if there is no change, you are basically dead. Death is lack of change. Right? Ultimately. Growth is questioning and changing. Now, why is it in the religious dimension we are forbidden that kind of truth? I'll let you answer that, but the fact of the matter is we are not forbidden that kind of truth because we've got it right here. Ask. Go ahead. There isn't a single question that you can put forward that man has not struggled with in his long history. There are no shocking questions. There's only the shocking inability to face the question. When Paul talks about no temptation has taken you but such as is common to man, we could paraphrase it, no question has taken you but such as is common to man. Don't be fearful. Ask, let it out. Seek. Because asking is a negative until it becomes a searching positive. We talked last week about reaching out with positive love. And Lisa Stoddard came up and said, "Do you mean compassion?" And before I could answer, she said, "No, you don't mean compassion." And I said, "Well, that's nice. Why don't I mean compassion?" She said, "Because compassion is a negative. It's ingrown. It has nothing to do with what's going on around you. It's an ego trip. Because it doesn't require any response." I feel so sorry for those people that were in the tornado. Did you do anything for them? I felt sorry for them. Have you been up there cleaning up? I felt very sorry for them. Did you give them a place to live? I felt really very sorry for those people that were in the tornado. Aren't I a wonderful fellow? I show compassion. What did you do? Nothing. But I did feel sorry for them. Now, asking questions is the same kind of a thing until it becomes an actual seeking, where I want to just not know what the important questions are, but I want to find the answers. And I think in a very real sense, as we conclude part one, part two will pick up at this particular point in terms of faith next week. But I think in a very important sense, asking and seeking and finding comes to bear in terms of God in our lives. Why do you go to church? Why do I go to church? There are all kinds of bazillion reasons. Good preaching, bad preaching. I think a lot of people choose churches with bad preaching because they know they're not going to be challenged, and they can still say, "I went to church and I listened, but nobody asked me to do anything, so I'm doing all right, I guess." Good singing, bad singing, well, a host of things. Ultimately, though, there's one valid reason for going to church. That is, it's a test of our religious experience mutually. I need desperately for you to reflect on my searching, asking, and finding, and I think you need my reflection with you on yours. It's the mutuality of sharing. It's the individuals who afterwards say, "I like this because of this," or "I didn't like this because of this," or "I think you ought to rethink this," or "I think that this is something you need to probe more deeply," or "this has been helpful to me because," and I know it's helpful to you because. It is precisely that mutuality of seeking, finding, and knowing ultimately that the kingdom of God, which is what the gospel of Jesus Christ is all about, is here and now and shared with us. So seek and find that kingdom and the power of God in life. For it is God in our life that makes the transforming difference, not bland acceptance of an outdated creed that not only doesn't know God, but seeks to hide him behind a veil of mystery, making him unavailable to each of us. May your asking and seeking find the fruition of a greater understanding of the depth of your own life. And even more than that, the strength that you have to face life.